I want you to picture something. It's around 1200 BC, ancient Greece. There's a warrior on a battlefield just outside Troy, spear in hand. But here's the thing. He isn't thinking about strategy. He's not weighing his options. He's just listening. He's listening for a command because a goddess, probably Athena, is speaking right into his mind, telling him exactly what to do next. And he doesn't question it for a second. He just does it. Now, think about your own head. You know that voice? The one that's probably reading this slide to you right now? That constant narrator that, let's be honest, never ever shuts up? Well, according to one of the wildest, most controversial theories in all of psychology, that voice, your inner voice, is a pretty recent invention. And before about 3,000 years ago, we humans didn't have it. Instead, we heard the voices of gods. All right, let's get into this, because it is a wild ride. This whole idea comes from a Princeton psychologist named Julian Jaynes. Back in 1976, he dropped this nearly 500-page book with a mouthful of a title, The Origin of Consciousness in the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. Now, I know it sounds like something straight out of science fiction, but Jaynes was deadly serious. So what is a bicameral mind? Well, Jaynes's basic idea was this. For most of human history, our minds were split into two chambers. You had the right hemisphere of the brain, which would just generate auditory hallucinations, actual voices. And then you had the left hemisphere, which would hear those voices and think, oh, that's not me, that's a god or a king or a dead ancestor telling me what to do. Basically, people didn't think for themselves. They were just told. And when you put them side by side, the difference is just huge. Before 1200 BC, you've got this external god voice barking orders. After that, you get our familiar internal narrator. Before, the right side of the brain was literally speaking to the left side. Now, our brain is more integrated. This means action used to be based on a direct command you couldn't ignore. Today, it's based on our own internal debate, our own choice. I mean, it is a completely different way of experiencing reality itself. So, look, I get it. This sounds completely bananas, right? And when it came out, a lot of people just dismissed it as academic nonsense. But here's the thing about the evidence Jaynes pulled together. It's kind of uncomfortably convincing. Jan's first big exhibit comes from a place you'd never expect. Homer's Iliad, one of the most important books in all of Western history. He claimed there was this massive clue hiding there in plain sight, and for centuries, nobody saw it. Think about this. In the entire epic poem, not one single character ever sits down and thinks. There's no internal debate, no weighing of pros and cons. When Achilles is about to lose his cool, he doesn't struggle with his anger. No, the goddess Athena literally shows up and tells him to calm down. When King Agamemnon makes a terrible, disastrous decision, the poem just says, well, a god gave him bad advice. They don't have rich inner lives, they just have divine instruction. And Jaynes said, look, it wasn't just the Greeks. You can find this pattern everywhere in the ancient world. Egyptian pharaohs would go into temples and have full-on conversations with statues, just waiting for a voice to answer them. Mesopotamian kings left behind tablets detailing their chats with the god Marduk about, tax policy and war. We always just assumed this was like religious theater. But what if it wasn't? What if they were just describing what was actually happening inside their heads? So if this was how humanity operated for thousands and thousands of years, what on earth happened? Well, according to Jaynes, sometime around 1200 BC, everything just broke. The gods fell silent, and it caused the breakdown of an entire way of life. And the timing is, well, it's pretty eerie. For millennia, these bicameral civilizations are thriving. But then, right around 1200 BC, the exact same time as the massive Bronze Age collapse, where entire empires just blinked out of existence, something new pops up in all the ancient literature. Suddenly, you've got characters who are having internal thoughts, people filled with doubt, with self-reflection, with that little voice asking, wait a minute, what should I do? The voices were gone. Jaynes thought maybe it was the stress of war and famine, or the invention of complex writing that somehow rewired our brains. But whatever the reason, for the first time in history, humans had to actually make decisions on their own. We had to invent this internal narrator, this inner voice, to guide ourselves. And what do you see in the texts from that era? A whole lot of existential dread. A feeling of being abandoned by the gods, of being totally and terrifyingly alone inside your own head. So what does any of this have to do with us right now? Are there any echoes of this ancient, two-chambered mind still kicking around today? Now, to be clear, mainstream psychology mostly thinks Jaynes was wrong. They argue the evidence is all circumstantial.
I mean, we can't exactly stick a 3,000-year-old person into an fMRI machine and see what's going on. But there's one piece of modern evidence that just makes this whole theory so deeply unsettling.
What if schizophrenia, a condition that affects about 1% of every population on Earth, no matter where you are, what if it isn't a disorder at all? What if it's an evolutionary throwback, a kind of glitch that temporarily reverts the brain back to the old bicameral system? I mean, just look at the parallels. They are really disturbing. In both cases, the voice feels totally external, like it's coming from outside. It gives commands, it offers a running commentary on your life. Its authority feels absolute, often divine. One was universal back in antiquity, the other is universal today. It kind of suggests that what we call a serious mental illness might actually be a window into how the human mind used to work for thousands of years. So, if Jaynes was right, what was the big trade-off? On one hand, living with the God voices meant a life without anxiety or self-doubt. You had total clarity. But the flip side was no innovation, no real art, no questioning authority, because authority was literally the voice of God in your head. When we developed our inner voice, we got everything that comes from questioning, philosophy, science, democracy. But we also got neurosis, depression, and that nagging, constant feeling that maybe we're not getting it right. And that brings us right back here to you, to that inner voice that's been listening to all of this. That voice that feels like the absolute core of who you are, that feels like you. It might just be a very recent and maybe even a very fragile little invention. For most of human history, people didn't have that endless internal chatter. They just acted. So here's the last thought I want to leave you with, and it's a bit of an unsettling one. If our consciousness isn't some fixed, permanent thing, if it could change so dramatically just 3,000 years ago, well, that means it could change again. That voice in your head right now might not be the final version. A few thousand years from now, our descendants might look back at our art and our books and think, how weird were those people, always talking to themselves, trapped inside their own heads? So the real question is, what comes after the narrator?